What's up? What's up? This is Nick Fenton here, options expert for Likefolio. Today we're going to be talking about a basic topic. We're going to be talking about buying and shorting stocks. And we're going to incorporate social sentiment. And social sentiment is a feature that can only be found in the Thinkorswim desktop trading platform or in Thinkorswim in general. Thinkorswim Mobile has it as well. Thinkorswim is only accessible by Ameritrade clients. So if you're not an Ameritrade client, I strongly encourage you to open an account with TD Ameritrade. We'll talk about a way that you can do that through Likefolio at the end of this video. But for now, let's discuss the basics of buying and shorting stocks and incorporating the social sentiment analysis tool along with that. So here we're looking at a 1-year daily bars chart of Lowe's, ticker symbol LOW. So each one of these bars represents a full day. And then at the bottom of the screen, so at the top we have the price chart, and the bottom we have the social sentiment for a 52-week period. In the social sentiment area, the orange line graph represents our overall sentiment percentage, 100 being the highest, 0 being the lowest, 100 being very high positive sentiment, 0 being as low as you can get negative sentiment. Then the blue area, we've got our neutral mentions, and green area, we've got positive mentions. And then the red area at the bottom, as you can see here in Lowe's, it's barely visible. That would be negative mentions. So one thing to mention here before we get too far into this is social sentiment and price action. There's not always going to be a relationship, but when you see a relationship between the two, it tends to be a really strong tool. Here in Lowe's, you can see there wasn't too much of a relationship between social sentiment and price prior to May of 2016. But once May hit, we started to see a little bit more activity here overall in the mentions area. Sentiment was pretty steady between almost 100% and 90%, somewhere in that range. I like to smooth things out. I don't really pay attention to it from a choppy line graph perspective. I just kind of view it as a slow, smooth move. So here we had a really nice sideways move. The stock itself was going sideways with a little bit of an upside tilt to it, I'd say. And then all of a sudden, sentiment started to kind of trend lower here, as you can see. So we had some really difficult times in Lowe's sentiment. So it was definitely trending lower in a big way. Now that trend lower started right about mid-August. We'll call it August 18th. Just so happens that this earning date precursed, was right around the same time that we saw the dip, but there was no tell with regard to social sentiment. It wasn't giving us a hint that we might see a dip into the earnings event. The dip took place pretty much at the same time, maybe a little bit after the earnings event. So that dip was actually telling us that there may be continued downside pressure in Lowe's. It didn't predict the bearish gap that we saw here in earnings last season, but it did show a predictive nature of continued downside based on this sentiment here. Another thing to mention is mention the mentions. So we had a big drop in positive mentions here, and that drop took place a few days after earnings, 4 or 5 days after earnings, when we really saw a significant drop there in positive mentions. So when you couple the downtrending sentiment with that big drop, just a cliff drop in positive mentions after the earnings event, that was a really strong indication that we may see continued downside pressure in Lowe's. And that's exactly what took place. We saw continued downside pressure in Lowe's. It has trended lower into this earnings event. And what I'm interested in here now is there a buying opportunity now that we've seen a pretty significant dip to the downside? I think I would personally be interested in starting to build a long position in the Lowe's, so starting to buy Lowe's. The reason is we're getting very close to this 52-week low in Lowe's, and that 52-week low is right around 63, currently at about 65.5 after today's selling pressure. So, 2.5 points away from 52-week lows. We've got earnings coming up I'd like to see it trickle even lower and get closer to this 63 level pre-earnings. But, I'd be comfortable starting to buy here. The reason I'd be comfortable starting to buy here is because I'm starting to see a pretty solid reversal taking place in the sentiment here. So again, we aren't looking at it at a choppy perspective. We're looking at it more smoothed out. And as you can see, when you smooth it out, it's just kind of channeling a bit higher here. And it's been doing so for a month. So, this isn't something that's just started happening. It's been doing so for a month, and it's powering higher, over the past 7 days, really making a significant move here from about 70% to almost 80% in sentiment. So 70 to 80% in sentiment. So we're definitely getting towards some strong levels here. I think this is an early indication that we may start to stabilize in price, and the price will eventually reverse. Now, when it will happen, tough to tell. The shift in sentiment started about a month ago, but it could take another month or so for this to play out. But with the price getting so close to 52-week lows, I think we're going to find some price support where people are just going to be willing to step in and start buying at these 52-week levels. And since we're getting so close, it doesn't have to be right at that 52-week low. It can just be in the area. Since we're getting so close to that area, I think we're going to start seeing some buy-side interest here in lows. So, when you couple the price action, never were to catch a falling knife, but in this case, I think there's a good enough reason to at least start building a position and taking some risk here. So, when you couple the price action, the fact that the price action is bearish, but the fact that we're getting close to some 52-week lows, potential support, I think that's strong. I think the fact that we have earnings coming up, that's going to bring some clarity to this situation. I'd want to position a little bit long pre-earnings, and then if the earnings support that long position, I may add to the position if it doesn't skyrocket higher. If it skyrockets higher, I would just take profits on my position that I had built pre-earnings. If it kind of stabilizes the stock price or just barely moves it a little bit higher, then I would start adding and maybe build a full long position at that point, as long as the sentiment continued to trend higher. One last thing to mention, though, there is no real movement in the positive mentions, but as you can see, that hasn't played much of a role here. Positive mentions have stayed pretty flat prior to this up spike, and then since it fell off a cliff, it's stayed pretty flat. So if you did see a spike in positive mentions, that would just bring more validity to the potential or to the conversation, I should say, that your educated guess of bullish price action is more and more reasonable. So if you agreed with this, so let's just say I say to myself, I really want to build this position. I'm in my paper money account. I'm not in live account right now, but same exact thing you would do in order to actually buy the stock in your live account, we can do here in the paper money account. So the first thing you want to do is you're on the charts tab right now. Let's move over to the trade tab. Make sure that Lowe, LOW is the ticker that's populated. And we want to hover over ask. You can see that below the mouse icon, the word buy pops up. If we go under bid, it says sell. That would be selling to open, shorting. We don't want to do that. We want to buy to open. So you simply click that. It's going to bring up the order entries tool screen here. It's going to tell us we're buying stock, 100 shares in this case, of Lowe's. Now you can change, you can increase or decrease the amount of stock you want to buy. So increasing here in 100 lot increments. If you wanted to put an odd lot in there, like 115, you just double click on the number and manually type that in. We're going to stick with 100. And it tells us our price, 65.63. This is going to be a limit order. I prefer limit orders all the time. I never use market orders. I always use limit orders. Day, this is going to stay active until the end of the business day. Good till cancel is your other option. Whenever I'm doing an entry order, I do day orders. When I'm doing exit orders, I'll do GTC or GTC extended. So extended just means that you're looking to open the position in extended hours. GTC extended means you want a good till canceled position, so it's going to continue working unless you manually cancel it, and it's also going to work in extended hour sessions. So that's generally what I'll choose if I'm exiting a position looking to take profits. I'll go ahead and, why not include extended hours? Might as well. But since we're doing an entry, let's stick with a day order. And once you clarify that all this stuff is correct, once you confirm it's all correct, you can go ahead and hit confirm and send. It's going to bring up your order confirmation dialog, and it's very important to just go through and make sure all this information is accurate. One thing I make sure that whatever the buying power effect that I calculated in my head, I make sure that's accurate. That I wasn't way off. That happens every once in a while, and then you have to adjust your position size. And then you just want to make sure you look at your resulting buying power for stock. Just kind of double check everything, make sure it's in line with what your expectations were. And if everything's good to go, you click send. We're on the trade tab. Let's go over to the monitor tab. Go down to working orders, open that, and here's where our order was routed to. So it tells you the time placed, the date and time. It just reiterates all the information that we already knew, and then tells you the status of the position is that it's working. So it'll remain working unless it fills. If it fills, it'll go down here to filled orders, or unless you right-click on it and hit cancel order, in which case it would move down here to canceled orders. So that's it for buying. Let's take a look at a short opportunity. This one's not quite as strong. I couldn't find many really strong short examples. This one has some good characteristics to it though, so I wanted to discuss it. So the first thing, we want to look at the price chart and say, there is definitely some resistance around this area here. And we recently kind of revisited that area around the 120 range. We'll call it 117 to 120 range. It pulled back. We recently had an earnings event, so we have earnings behind us, which is positive. We don't have to worry about earnings trade risk. So the earnings are behind us. There was a little bit of a dip to the downside after the earnings. It stayed sideways, and then today had a little bit of a collapse further to the downside. But we still haven't seen a significant downside move, just a little bit of sell side pressure off of this resistance area here. Another thing to note is we had a pretty decent uptrend intact, and as of today, the uptrend has definitely broken. So that uptrend support should now act as resistance, and this is just another bearish indication. So first bearish indication, it fell off of the resistance level after earnings. Second bearish indication, it wasn't able to hold that uptrend support today. It broke through with a bit of persistence. Now, what about the social sentiment? So social sentiment is fairly interesting here in Apple. If we're looking at the overall sentiment percentage, you can see it's been pretty sideways before that recent drop off. So we saw this recent drop off. It was pretty significant, and it caused this trend to the downside. The price action dipped a bit lower, following that drop off. Then we saw this spike take place to the upside in price. That was coupled with a little bit of propulsion to the upside. We started to see some trending to the upside here in the overall sentiment area. Along with that upside, we saw some channeling to the upside here in the overall price of Apple. Now we're starting to see it kind of, if you smooth it out, again, like I always mention, we're starting to see it kind of smooth lower. So it's starting to trend lower again. And that's kind of going along with the price here. Another thing to mention is we saw this nice boost in positive mentions right here, kind of in this whole area here. And if we line that up with the price, you can see that those mentions were a precursor to this move in price right here. So the mentions took place kind of in this range, and then boom, we got a nice boost to the upside. Well, the mentions fell off, and they've been trending lower. If we pull out the trend tool, you can see they've kind of been slowly trending to the downside here. And we're starting to see that slow trend to the downside in price finally. So again, it's not an exact science here. You just kind of want to look for these slight indications in social sentiment, these slight indications that the retail environment, the consumers themselves are becoming potentially bearish. Potentially bearish in the sense of sentiment trending lower in this case, and potentially bearish in the sense of these positive mentions just slowly trickling lower. Nothing really impressive taking place here from a mentions perspective. So when you combine those two things, it's not as strong as a case as Lowe's was for the buy side, but there is a case here to short Apple shares. I would probably do it in smaller size than usual just because the case is not extremely strong, but it's strong enough to where it's got me interested. So the way to do that is we go over here. Again, we're on charts now. We'd go to the trade tab and we'd click on bid this time. So as you can see, when we hover over bid, under the mouse cursor, the word sell shows up. So left click on the bid, it's going to populate the order entries tool. It's going to tell you this time we're on the sell side. And you're going to see the quantity is minus 100, whereas before it was plus 100. So minus 100 just indicates we're selling to open here. We're selling 100 shares to open. And the price that we're looking at is 111.40 limit. So essentially, the objective here, when we're buying, we want to buy it at a specific price. We want that price to increase in value so that we can sell it at a higher price. In this case, we're looking to sell to open at 111.40, and we want that price to decrease in value so that we can cover our short shares at a lower price and then keep the difference. So, just the easy example of if the shares were to go down to 110, we could cover at 110. We'd keep the difference between 111.40 and 110. That's $1.40. So you'd have $1.40 per share profit. I'm going to keep the limit order here. Again, it's going to be a day order. Confirm and send. Look through everything in the order confirmation dialog box. Make sure everything's kosher. Make sure it's exactly what you expected, anticipated. Make sure your buying power effect is not too high. And once everything is confirmed, you just go ahead and hit send. We're on the trade tab. Let's move over to the monitor tab. You can see our working orders. We've now added the minus 100, to sell to open the Apple shares. So we've got two working orders now. We've got buy to open 100 shares of Lowe's and sell to open 100 shares of Apple's. Both at their respective price limits or limit prices that we put in, both day orders, both currently working. So that sums up buying and shorting. It's really the social sentiment, when it's applicable, can be a very strong tool to utilize just to give you a stronger educated guess. You never can be certain what direction a price is going to go. But if you start to see interesting observations in the price area of the chart, and then you can back that up with interesting observations in social sentiment, then you're just strengthening your case. And you're strengthening it not with a lagging indicator like most technical analysis indicators. You're strengthening it with a social sentiment forward-looking indicator. That's very important. This is a forward-looking indicator. It's leading the price. It's not lagging the price. Very important information here. Encourage you to look closely at social sentiment when you see interesting things. And that wraps this video up. Special pro tip alert. Visit learn.likefolio.com. We've got more Likefolio Trade School videos, all exciting, jam-packed with education, beneficial, actionable, awesome. Also going to have a special brokerage offer for you, so make sure you visit.